For most hero shooters / ability based games, you have your typical 3 types of roles: tank, DPS, and supports. DPS is the most popular role because it's where the most carry potential is on your team, and it's where the guys with the biggest egos go to flex and throw games. But if you have the best mechanics, you can easily reach the highest rank in the game just by playing DPS. The support role is also very popular. Maybe not everyone's favorite role to play, but by far the most important role in the game. It's the glue that keeps the team together, but some people don't like playing it because sitting back and healing doesn't activate enough neurons for them. Maybe it's the lack of impact the role has, but it's not a role where you need to have good aim. You can play support if your positioning is atrocious, if you have less game sense than a stick, if you like spamming abilities without knowing what cooldowns are, if you're a worthless talentless loser, or if you just want the game to play for you. There are many reasons why support is popular. Last and certainly the most disappointing role in all of gaming is the tank role. That's not to say that tanks are completely useless. They are made for a reason, and that is mainly to absorb damage and abilities while holding down the fort. Since they have a bigger health pool compared to the other 2 roles, they lack in damage, being more defense than offense. Tank is commonly the least popular role in many games because players don't feel strong when they play tank. Sure, they stand around and take a lot of damage, but without a healer or support to keep them up, they completely fall over. Pair this up with the awful damage output they have, and taking the brunt of the enemy team's physical and sometimes mental abuse, and it's no shock to anyone why this role gets treated like a job application. Compared to the other roles, it doesn't really feel like you're contributing to the game. Most of the time, you're just gonna be holding your shield up and taking space. Statistically, you can't really see how much you are actually doing compared to the healing of a support or the damage of a DPS. If players can't look at the scoreboard and see they aren't putting World War II levels of numbers, to them, it's gonna feel like they aren't doing much. The only way you do good as tank is all about how you take and play space, and reacting to what the enemy team does, so you can either block it or disrupt it. But overall, you don't get as many big plays on tank, so it feels less fun and less rewarding to play. This becomes a major issue in Overwatch, especially when talking about 5v5, limiting the tank role to 1 instead of 2. The person who is so unfortunate enough to be the one solo tanking for its entire team is then mercilessly slapped around by the enemy team while they slowly lose their will to live. This also gets worse if a character who was designed to play with another tank because they either lack a shield or an ability to take the pressure off of them is now forced to fend for themselves, which just results in an absolute steamroll. To fix this, Blizzard with their endless wisdom made all of the tanks even tankier just to compensate for losing one. Now heroes like Roadhog take 2 more abilities before they start flaming his supports for not keeping them alive while face tanking the whole enemy team. But we're talking about the Overwatch 2 balance team in their prime. Then we're just gonna allow a patch note to be balanced. So not only did they give the solo tank some bonus health, they also gave them way too much damage. So not only were you the biggest, easiest to hit, but now you were the most important because you did more damage than any of the DPS on your team. The enemy team were like moths to a flame, throwing every single ability at you because if you died, so did the rest of your team. Being the most important person on your team comes with all of the pressure being placed onto you. For people with main character syndrome, this would be the perfect change tank needed. But for everyone else, this just made tank even more depressing to play, since if you were the first one to die, your team wouldn't skip a beat telling you you're the reason why abortions exist. If you were a major Reinhardt fan and decided to one-trick him, well, chances were, once you won a single fight, the entire enemy team was going to counter-swap your Reinhardt, making it impossible to do anything on him. But let's say you had parents and swapped off your one-trick just to counter them because you actually wanted to win the game. Guess what they did once they lost the fight? Counter-swapped again. So every game boiled down to a cat and mouse chase on who counter-swapped better than their opponent did. So even if your character was a tank, your experience would be ruined because the enemy team would just pick a character that makes your beloved character completely useless. It's just a losing battle when you're playing tank because every single role counter-swaps you. And it just works so well in 5v5 because tanks are the deciding factor whether you win or lose a fight. So in most games, you would have to swap off your favorite character just to play a character you don't even like. And if you didn't, the enemy team will absolutely steamroll while your team calls you every slur in the book.
I'm feeling romantical.
There was just no winning as a solo tank. When I quit Marvel Rivals when triple support was dominating the game, I decided to try Overwatch again. And my golly, playing tank in 5v5 felt like being a punching bag for Prime Mike Tyson with atom bombs strapped to his fist. In Rivals, it felt pretty good to play as tank. I mean, most of the time, I didn't feel like I was overwhelmed or couldn't stand my ground. But in Overwatch, every second I would either be put in a coma, antied, stunned, or any other disability the enemy team could give me. So that got me wondering, why does tank in Overwatch feel so much worse than in Rivals? And I didn't get an answer to that question until I played Overwatch's 6v6. Instantly, all of the negative things I had about the tank role were immediately fixed. I mean, who knew adding another tank to help you soak up the damage and crowd control effects made playing tank a whole lot funner? It's crazy to think that the Overwatch content creators really just got on their hands and knees for these devs, telling them that all the horrible, terrible changes they were making were actually good for the game, just to get that special treatment. I was astounded how much better 2 tanks felt compared to 1 tank. But even if I was solo tanking in Marvel Rivals, I didn't feel as much stress being placed on me because tanks felt strong, like actually sturdy. It's not because tanks were overloaded with strong, sustained, and high damaging abilities, like Overwatch's super tanks, but because the support healing output is just so high that they could reliably keep you alive for an entire fight. So the enemy was more likely to stop putting as much pressure onto you and start distributing that pressure onto your backline, making the solo tank experience less about ripping your hair off, but more about playing Mr. President. But some tanks were getting just way too much value, so the Rivals balance team started handing out fat nerfs, either making their damage or sustain more obsolete by the week. And after season 3 dropped, I realized all the tanks I used to play were just completely useless now. I mean, yeah, most tanks like Strange did need a damage nerf, but I started finding myself not being able to kill half HP targets or just mispositioned supports. And I mean, this is about the time where everybody learned how to counter his ultimate, so Strange just feels like a meat shield now. So just having a really inconsistent ult was a big downfall for Strange. Emma had some insane survivability, but also had some ridiculous damage. So I would agree she needed some nerfs, but I think they went a little too overboard with some of her survivability nerfs, considering how close she needs to get to actually deal damage. And the thing just sucks. After the first 3 days of playing season 3, I just looked at the tank roster with an empty feeling inside. I felt like tanks were just not fun and not good anymore. Most of the tank roster were just very overhyped to the point where the devs nerfed them all to the ground. And yeah, some of the damage numbers were delusional, but so much of the strength that comes from Marvel Rivals is the ultimates, and most of the tank roster have very lackluster ultimates or is just very easy to counter. They were either countered by hiding behind something or just shooting them, or in the case of the Thing, you could just walk away from it. The only tank with a good ultimate is Magneto, but his pressure in the neutral game is just very weak. In Rivals, you can get away with a bad neutral game just as long as your ultimate was good enough to bait out a support ultimate. But tanks in general have very predictable and weak ultimates. That's why people don't really enjoy playing tank as much this season. Pair this with the resurgence of dive, and the main tank has to give up all his space just to see that Black Panther has already killed his entire backline. In the current Rivals meta, tanks don't really have an option to contribute to the team, and that's why you're starting to see so many players starting to quit tank. And just because, I'll talk about tanks in League. The problem I have with the balancing of League of Legends is that the devs think in only one dimension when balancing these characters. Most of the balance changes they make involve either how much damage they deal or how much damage they take. So Riot either makes these tanks unkillable bringers of doom and destruction, or just as squishy and harmless like a pull noodle. The only way they think they could get players to play tank is by giving them a bunch of damage, when that's not the case at all. There is so many ways to balance a character. If I took a bottle of pepper spray and sprayed like a 100-pound female, they'd be out for like a few minutes. But then if I took that same bottle of pepper spray and sprayed a 1,000-ton mountain, who do you think the pepper spray should last longer on? Well, if you said the mountain, you'd be wrong. They both last the exact same amount of time. Playing as a tank in League of Legends feels horrible because when I'm stopped by a bubble, I don't really feel tanky. The only thing Riot has to do is make tanks feel better to play, and I think they could easily do this by giving tank items more tenacity and resistances to slows, because nothing feels worse than being a big fat slow target that gets stopped by a banana peel, and that's why tanks in League feel awful to play. The only real tank option for tenacity is Mercury Treads, and that only comes at 30%. For slow resistances, it's not much better, with the only options being is another pair of boots and Deadman's Plate, giving 25% each. If they just gave weaker items like Thornmail, Heartsteel, and Hollow Radiance 12% tenacity or slow resistance, players will be way more willing to play tank. Even dumb things like if you get 150% size, you straight up become immune to knockups. This is a great way to make size actually useful. Simple changes like that will make tank feel great to play, even with bad items or bad character designs. I think most devs get the balance and the identity of the tank role wrong. They believe it's because of the lack of damage is why players don't want to play it, when it's the lack of tenacity and stun immunity that the role is really missing. When I first played Rivals, I noticed how all of these characters had some way of cancelling crowd control effects, and it felt amazing. That stress of not needing to worry that the enemy was gonna stun you out of a super cool move made you feel like you were an actual superhero, and I feel like that's what Overwatch and League are missing. Not damage, but more unstoppable effects when playing tank. So for any devs listening,
hey y'all, come look at this.
tank should be balanced around being both a unstoppable force and an immovable object, like the Juggernaut or even a Cyanol. A tank is a force who can only come to a stop when he is slowly chipped away at, but playing tank in all of these games makes the role feel very puny. I should be able to say, hey, if you want to get to my supports, you're gonna have to go through me. But instead, they just pull my pants down, then devour my supports in seconds, and I'm helpless to stop it. The reason why the unstoppable effect in Rivals doesn't save the role is because most of the characters in the game can do the same thing you can, but just have a way better ultimate than you have. Well, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, or you will be stun locked for 15 seconds in your next game of Marvel Rivals.